My brothers and sisters, we are on talk number 40 out of 117 scriptures in the Old Testament that everyone should know. I want to talk with you about the famous battle of the prophets. That's right, the battle of the prophets. You're probably thinking, what? There was a battle of the prophets? Well, you could say so. And so what happened? It takes place during the ministry of Elijah. The people of Israel were attracted to follow a god of nature, a storm god by the name of Baal. And the reason why they were attracted to following Baal is he seemed to be a god that you could manipulate to get things from. You do something, you get something, quid pro quo. The God of Israel works differently. You don't manipulate the God of Israel. You have to be faithful to the God of Israel. Totally different. You have to walk with him. You have to live out that covenant relationship, and you have to be faithful. You can't manipulate the true God of Israel. False gods, maybe. And so what happened is that the people were turning to Baal, and they were trusting in this God more. It was a god of the local people in the area. And not only that, but it was a god that was associated with immorality and impurity and so forth. Scholars debate about, over exactly how far they went with some of this. But the bottom line is that there was no rain in the land of Israel for over 3 years. And Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal to essentially a test or a spiritual battle. He said, let's meet on the top of Mount Carmel. You prophets of Baal call on your God, I'll call on the God of Israel. The God that answers with fire is the true God. So they were to set up a sacrifice and call on their God, but they would light no fire. God himself would have to answer with fire. It reminds us of that scene in Leviticus chapter 9, verses 23 to 24, when God started all sacrifice, when fire came down from heaven and started the sacrificial worship in Israel. And so, of course, the prophets of Baal went first, and they put on a real, colorful display of worship. They were jumping over the sacrifice, running around, making noise, putting on quite a show, even cutting themselves with knives while blood was flowing out, and they were calling on their God. And Elijah kind of started to mock them, he could tell nothing was going to happen. And after they pretty much run out of energy, Elijah said, okay, now it's my turn. And he had an altar built with 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel, reminding us of the altar built in Exodus 24 at Sinai. He had the sacrifice placed on it, but he had water poured over it 3 different times. Lots of water. Why water? Why so much water poured over the sacrifice? Because he wanted to show the people that, this was truly a work of God. He didn't sneak behind it and light a fire or anything, but that God himself was truly going to consume this sacrifice and demonstrate that he was true God. So let's go now to 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 36. 1 Kings 18, 36. And it says, at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah, the prophet, came near and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that thou art God in Israel, and that I am thy servant, and that I have done all these things at thy word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that thou, O Lord, art God, and that thou hast turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces. And they said, the Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God. There's something really important here with this prayer. Elijah prayed his prayer during the evening offering, which occurred right around 3 p.m. in the evening. Very interesting that while this offering was taking place in the temple in Israel, Elijah, about 100 miles away on Mount Carmel, was praying at the same time. And God answered his prayer at the very time when that offering was taking place, right around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Elijah prays. It was pretty amazing because hundreds of years later, when Christ died on the cross, he breathed out his last breath. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Right about that same time, 3 p.m. Interesting. And what's also interesting is the faith that Elijah has that God is going to answer his prayer. When you turn to God, and when you turn to God in prayer, have faith that God is going to answer your prayer. It might not be according to your plan. It might be according to his plan. We have to be open for his will, ready to do his will. So my brothers and sisters, we look at the prayer of Elijah. We look at his faith. May God give you the same faith when you turn to the Lord in prayer. Know that he hears your prayers.